Hi, my name is Jerry Daykin, and we're not leading media at Beam Suntory. I'm a WFA Diversity Ambassador. And building on some of the great work of the WFA Diversity Task Force, I've actually written a book on inclusive marketing. It talks about why representation matters so much in our marketing industry, and critically also how you can practically deliver it. But because I didn't know all the answers, earlier this year I interviewed around 24 marketers from different companies, from different sides of our industry, to try and get their perspectives and their top tips. And in partnership with Campaign, we're bringing you some of those interviews. You can read them all in full alongside the framework for how to deliver this in the book. The very first interview for the book was with Belinda Smith. She's my co-diversity ambassador at the WFA, and she's just founded her own fantastic organisation called The Second Arrow, really helping drive quite big transformations, especially with an inclusion and diversity perspective in the marketing industry. And I chatted to her about the whole process, and actually she asked some of the questions back to me. So you'll really dig into why representation mattered to us both and practically how we think you can deliver it, starting with our own teams. Belinda, let me start by asking you a question. Why is this topic so important to you? Why does representation matter to you?
Thanks for having me. It's good to be here. Why representation matters? I mean, I think there's a couple of things. I think the most obvious piece is just making things that represent the world that we live in. And it really seems like it shouldn't be as difficult as it is. I think there's also, there's also the desire to just see yourself reflected in your own work. I have a son, and so there's an acknowledgement of thinking about the world that he's growing up in and what he's exposed to and how those things are curated, and hoping that it shows him a balanced and or accurate picture of the world. But I think more than anything, I over the past few years have been really focused and kind of obsessed on healthy teams and balanced teams. And to me, I mean, the way you'll probably hear this come through over and over again in this conversation, and Jerry, you've heard this many times before, but starting internally and starting with a healthy and an inclusive and a balanced team naturally just leads to better work, and it leads to work that we would label as more diverse, but I would just personally label as more accurate. So I think there are a couple of layers of why it's really important, but for me at the base layer, it's really a measure on team health and internal health and kind of what's going on behind the scenes, and that's really important to me.
I hope by the end of this series we can almost rename it just good marketing. It doesn't have to be inclusive marketing. Yeah. It's just good marketing. Yeah. Full stop.
Well, Jerry, I think I have a hint at what your answer might be, but why don't you tell us, why does representation matter to you?
There's a lot of different things. I don't know. You probably have heard my answer before, but I think I've lived a very privileged, white middle class male life. So I've by no means felt like an outsider most of my life, but I have a bit to my life in which I have been a bit on the outside. And I think that has given me an experience which makes me realize how important inclusion, representation, being truly welcomed into work, into culture, into society around you is. And I think that's why I'm a big ally for it in all communities and in all kind of intersectionalities. But I'm a gay man, and I grew up in a very loving but very conservative Christian family. At a time where here in the UK you couldn't talk about being gay in school, like illegal. You wouldn't see anything about that on kids' TV, etc. So I was kind of trying to work out who I was at a time when there was almost nothing to suggest that other gay people even existed, or if they did, it kind of came from the Bible, which is maybe not the best place to find that representation. Lots of good things in there, but yeah, and I remember, and actually kind of coming on to the next question about kind of what good representation looks like. I remember really early examples. When I was a teenager, there was a TV show in the UK called Queer as Folk. It was a really progressive. They remade it for the US. A really, really progressive TV show about a group of gay guys living up in Manchester, and I used to sort of slightly secretly watch it late at night and be like, oh my gosh, it's a very, very eye-opening show in a number of ways. But it ultimately showed me people like me existed, and were having a good life, and it was going well. But it started to make me think, well, if big businesses are willing to talk to me, then I can't be all that bad. So yeah, for me, from quite a young age, the kind of the media, the marketing representation has been important.
But
Are there?
I think you're hitting
Go on.
on a key point that I missed, but I have talked about sometimes, which is the more you can see yourself, it's almost like normalizing a behavior or normalizing acceptance of a part of society, which is really important. And I think that's what I think about in context of my son. Is a lot of people as marketers, I think, are really good at being self-deprecating, and I'm chief among them. But it is quite powerful to acknowledge that our work really shapes how people perceive life and reality, how they treat other people, what things they accept, what things seem normal, what things seem good, things seem
Yeah.
bad. And so I think your story really hits on that well, which is like representation matters because this medium is so much of how we learn to think about the world around us.
And it's almost like, I mean, I absolutely don't expect every advert I see to be, a gay couple, or
Well, I
if I was
expect everyone to be Black, so just
every single one, every single one. But it's like if none of them
yeah,
do, if literally none of it does, that's when it kind of becomes. And as you're right, we shouldn't overstate how wonderful our marketing is. Most people forget our ads as soon as they're off the telly, but it's that kind of
yeah,
combined feeling. If you stood in Times Square and you looked around the billboards and like none of them
yeah.
looked like you or sounded like you or seemed to be like you, that's quite it's quite hard to take. Can you think of any like examples, like recent ads or over the course of your life, your career, where you've really seen like, wow, that's moved representation forward for me?
Yeah, I think so. My bone to pick recently is are ads that are I don't know what to call them. I guess I would call them, I don't know if it's PC to say like if they're rainbow coalition ads, but essentially ads that try to have like one of every type of something
Yeah,
in the ad. It's so aggravating. And so I've been, because I'm such a geek of a marketer, during my annual break over the winter, I was really observing ads and
yeah,
noticing which ones are using like the stock photo family of like the racially ambiguous mom and the very successful white dad, but he has brown hair, so I don't know, maybe there's something exotic about him too, versus like people who would just show a Muslim family or an Indian family or a Black family or a Jewish family or a gay family or whatever it is, and really kind of embracing an understanding of those communities and being unafraid to show them authentically and to center
yeah,
them, and to make the ad or the message or the creative all about them, versus the ad that's like, oh, well, I guess we kind of need a darkish person in here, so let's stick
yeah,
that in one of the mom or one of the kid positions. And so I've been really proud of the people doing it right, the people from both a casting and a narrative standpoint, like fully leaning into all the goodness and the culture and the richness of things that are not, heteronormative, economically privileged white families on TV. So that's been really good. The other,
I think there's a real watch out there, isn't there? Around like there isn't a sort of an awkward middle ground you fall in where you want to start on this journey, you want to be more
yeah,
inclusive, you want to
yeah,
move in that direction, but you end up with this slightly weird paint by numbers inclusion that's kind of, let's throw a few different people on the screen and
inclusion
hope that
by
that pleases
committee.
everyone. Yeah, versus actually like the interesting thing is finding the authentic nuances and stories and different things about different communities that everyone pays attention. That's what a good advert is, like an interesting story. Yeah, I think there's a real watch out about falling in that middle,
Yeah, it's
well meaning but risky
it's
space. Yeah,
almost like what we talk about the definition of inclusion a little bit is, there's this analogy that I don't love, and so I'm not going to master, about like being invited to the party versus like someone asking you to dance or something like that. Like, representation
yeah,
is one thing, inclusion is separate. And I think that especially in our work, it is, representation can oftentimes be either tropish, or it can be, I'm pulling someone from a different community and I want to portray them through a white cis heteronormative lens versus I'm pulling someone from a different community and I'm just interested to see what their natural expression is. So it's like
Yeah.
inclusion, I'm trying to fit you into my box, into my script, into my understanding, versus inclusion as like, wow, there's something really great and unique, and that's the piece that I'm interested in and the piece that I want to highlight.
Well, that's quite a good segue, because normally at this point I start to ask you for a few tips. But if you'll bear with me a minute, I wanted to share a bit of the work that we've been doing as part of the WFA Task Force, with lots of input from the other marketers we work with. And it was basically, it's exactly to that point, which is that when people start on this inclusive journey, the sort of, in a way, the worst way to do it is just to go to the casting room and
Yes.
like let's just change one or two people in
Right.
the casting. There's a much bigger marketing process, and we broke that down into 12 stages, which is partly what happens when you get a committee to design something. But I think it is important that there are nuances throughout the whole process, from kind of the stages involved in briefing, in planning, in production, and then to go live. And we really tried to talk through how, you don't start a casting, you start with your business and your brand challenge. What's the opportunity? What are the growth opportunities? Why is there a business reason to be wanting to talk to some different communities? What is the opportunity there? Make sure that's in your brief, so that the whole question you're asking your partners, your teams, your agencies, isn't just, solve this how we always used to and then tack something on.
Right.
It's like, what is the big opportunity
Yeah.
here? And then right through like the partner selection, the production, into the media, which I'm really passionate about. And that's what we're going to try and bring to life in this podcast series, in this series, some of those different stages. But sometimes I think people find that whole process a bit overwhelming. So where do you think people can get started on that journey, Belinda? Where if you are sort of a marketer, just maybe you shouldn't dip your toe in order, diving into this, where do you get started?
That is a great question, in which I will ask back to you after I take my pass at it. I think I spent a lot of time, we spent a lot of time, the WFA spent a lot of time over the past 2 years with people becoming more interested in this topic and really being overwhelmed by everything out there, and asking this exact question of where and how do I start? Um, I feel bad for repeating myself all the time, but my answer is still like, it starts internally. It starts
Yeah.
around the table of creators. And when you were just explaining the 12-step process and starting with the brief, the reason why we're doing it, I think is brilliant. And we've never like gotten that far back before. And I think it starts at the table of the people who are creating the work, because that's where you strike the agreement for why are we doing this work, and how can we keep each other accountable? How can we have healthy debate? Do we have the right people around the table, so somebody can be like,
Yeah.
hey, this casting seems really inauthentic and we're probably like really doing more harm than good at this point? Do you have people who can bring those ideas to the table? Do they feel like they can speak up? When they speak up, do you listen to them? Does it change your decision making? Does it change your business decisions? And so, because it can be so overwhelming, I think the concept of like looking at your team, the team of people you work with day to day, and how can you make that a more balanced and representative team? And also, how can you make that team a safe space? Because, having different people at the table doesn't really matter if you're not going to listen to any of them, or if you're not going to listen to any of their ideas unless they're just repeating your ideas. So
Yeah.
I always think of that as the best first place to start. And for a lot of people who aren't in global diversity ambassador roles, where they can't snap their fingers and make changes, I think that is something that you can do, is shifting the culture of your team and shifting the discussions that you're having about the work that you're doing. How did I do? What's your thought on
Well, I think that's a great. I think that's a great. If you are going to throw it back to me, I think I want to just say start with media, because media is where my passion is. But no, you probably. It's 100% the right answer, which is, we created 12 stages and asked loads of questions each time. But if you read between the lines, the questions are always just saying like, have you really considered other perspectives at this point in your process? Have you really thought about how people could be involved in different ways, how people could feel safe and included to share those views, etc. And I think that I really hope in 5-10 years time we won't be needing to talk about this at all, because we'll have built a more inclusive industry with people from different perspectives. And I think even now there are small things you can do in your team, like very short term, like you say, to make it more inclusive. But I also think there are some really great partners out there. Like if you may be trying to talk to communities where you don't have anyone from your team, and as a white middle class man, that doesn't mean I can't make great advertising that appeals to the Black American community. But I'm probably risking my arm quite a lot if I don't engage it in some way with people with experience in that community, with that background along the process. And I think that's the key thing: getting those people in the room, whether they're in your team, in your agencies, with kind of dedicated consultants, whether it comes through research you do. Just to find a way to get those voices in the room and just keep listening to them right through the process. And I think you'll find we move in quite a good direction.
Well, I think in for some people that's actually a better first start before even what I just said, perhaps, which is educate yourself.
Yeah.
And you and I do this work 24/7 because of who we are and what our identities are. But I think for a lot of people, like step one can just be learning more and prepping yourself to be able to have these discussions and conversations. So that's a good call out as well, Jerry.
And I think it's super easy to do nowadays because there's so much content out there, and I think you got to be careful, because I think there's a trap you fall in where you then you expect your colleagues from various minorities or different groups to be the ones educating you. It's not their responsibility. It's your responsibility to go out, find answers, learn about other cultures. And one of the other things that we've done on the WFA, kind of your captain of Belinda, is some of the work we've been doing on the census. And what does that tell us about kind of where we are with inclusion in the industry, and frankly where we need to get to over the next couple of years?
Yeah, the census was really great because it's a global piece of work, and we don't often have global conversations about this topic. It's really hard because the topic is very nuanced globally. And so the census was a moment where we invited everyone from the industry, whether you work at a brand or an agency or a tech company. But if you work in marketing, we asked individuals to fill out a survey and do like an industry inclusion survey and tell us about their lived experiences. And I think, it kind of weaves into what we've been talking about this whole time about taking others' perspectives. My issues, the things that I feel really really resourced to speak about and to impact, are different from yours, are different from people in Asia. And so I think the census was really great for two things. One, it gives us a benchmark of, at this moment in time, this is where we were globally as an industry on diversity and inclusion. And we didn't see anything that was surprising there. We have a problem with age. We have a problem with gender. We have a problem with ethnicity. We have problems with disability. But again, we have that kind of line in the sand benchmark that we'll get to repeat and measure year over year. And I think the other thing about that was it's starting to bring up some themes that we can talk about. And something that can feel scary in this work is like, you don't want to say the wrong thing or make the wrong people upset, and you want to get it just right, so that you don't offend anyone or you're not canceled or whatever it is. And this is really showing us, I think, some powerful themes. And some of those themes in places such as APAC have been really about hiring people of national origin versus flying in, your B team from your A country to run that group. And so it's really interesting. It's like it's still a form of like marketing industry colonization that we're doing. And I never would have had the insight or the right words to have that discussion with anybody had it not been for the census highlighting things like that. I think another thing that really popped was the delta in reported experiences between majority versus ethnic minority populations by country, even though those minority populations are different in their makeup. Delta in every country. And so, again, we just have a baseline from where we can speak in an informed and an empowered way to say, actually, here are the trends that we know are true and are present globally, and we can start to measure those over time. So as you can tell, I'm very excited about it.
Well, I mean, there is a lot in there. One of the things that really stood out for me, which you have touched on a bit earlier in this chat, was that there are examples where representation of some minorities is starting to look a lot better, but inclusion of them is not necessarily, as in like maybe they're not at the same senior levels, or amongst quite a lot of them, the sort of minority groups, they were much more likely to be thinking about leaving the industry, about not being, not feeling a place here, which I think is a real watch out and something we need to keep working on. But we've kind of run out of time already, which is fantastic. But it's good chatting. Now, luckily, I get to keep having these conversations. You're off the hook, Belinda, but I'm going to keep talking to about a dozen or so people in this first series, trying to really dive into this kind of marketing framework, hear from them why this is an important topic, and also some of their tips and practical advice. So I hope you come back and watch some more of those episodes, and ultimately check out the book we're working on at the end of it all. But Belinda, thank you so much for your time, and I look forward to trying to solve the world globally together. And as you hint at, it gets really tricky when you think globally about some of this stuff, but it's important that we're starting to. So thank you, Belinda.
Yeah, thanks for having me. This was really fun.
Thank you so much for listening and watching this episode of Representation Matters. It's a series of interviews from the Inclusive Marketing book. If you've enjoyed this, please watch some of the others. Please share with your friends and colleagues who you think might find it useful. And of course, please buy a book. Buy a book for your whole team. And if you'd love to know more about it, then get in touch with me, get in touch with the WFA Diversity Task Force. We're all on this journey together. So thank you for watching.